Hello and welcome to this roundtable featuring Jonathan Stalls. I'm very excited. This is our final roundtable of the year. Let me just do this. I should have done this before I started, but I'm going to share the graphic. Here we are. How does that look, everyone? Looks all right?
Great, yes.
Okay, yes, this is why we are gathered. A man that I think probably needs no introduction in many walkability circles, but I will be introducing him. I'll be doing a proper introduction in a minute. We are gathered here to talk about his book, Walk, Slow Down, Wake Up and Connect at 1 to 3 miles per hour, which was just published this year by North Atlantic Books, correct? And I'm in the middle of it, as I've been writing to Jonathan on WhatsApp, sending photos of myself reading it around the city, crying on public transportation, so moved by the passages. I highly recommend it. This is also the last roundtable of the year for the Global Walkability Correspondence Network, which was founded in January of this year. People gathered, we're all here, part of this network, and I'm so grateful for everyone gathered. I'm so grateful for everything that's happened this year, for the wild momentum, I would say, of this network, which is really only a reflection of people's great interest in issues of walkability and the many dimensions it connects to of thriving communities. And we've had so much happen this year, and I'm really looking forward to unfolding a bit in December and putting together some material to share with the network and the general public about all the things we've done, all the roundtables, all the activities of the working groups. And I have an announcement to make that I did clear with Jonathan beforehand, because I want to say that Jonathan is a person who I've really touched base with ongoing this year because of his extensive background, grassroots organizing, his extensive background with pedestrian advocacy and such unique viewpoint, connecting with municipalities, but also people and all ages, and just an incredible, multidimensional, multi-generational, multicultural, everything focus. And he's been a person that I've gone to in so many situations to touch base and reflect on organizing and network building and taking part in movements and challenges, but also the thrill of it all, weaving, as he says so many times. So I want to say thank you, Jonathan, just for being a person that one can approach in that way and being so generous with yourself. And also the announcement is that I'm so excited to welcome Alan Raposo as network co-facilitator. We need this, first of all, because this is a very busy role, but I think also the network will simply benefit from having another facilitator with different perspectives, and who's also very, very present, very engaged, came into the network with so much to share as well. So Alan, if you would like to say something, and then I'll go on to introduce Jonathan for the roundtable.
Yeah, of course. Thank you very much, Anika. It's just been amazing to discover the network this year, meet all of you, and see what a group of crazy volunteers we all just really love talking about this, learning more about everything that's related to sustainability in the city in many different ways. And I expect that 2023 is going to be a really good year for the network. We're going to get lots of stuff going on.
Absolutely. We have already been talking a lot about a lot of organizational changes just meant to streamline things and really make the network more accessible and fun. And, I just thought it would be so great to announce it at the beginning of this roundtable. So thank you, Jonathan, for allowing that. And he was excited to hear the news, I think, understanding what's been going on behind the scenes. So without further ado, I would like to read a bio for Jonathan before turning it over to him. Jonathan Stalls spent 242 days walking across the United States in 2010 and has continued to move alongside thousands of people for thousands of miles. He founded Walk to Connect in 2012 and currently moves through the world as a walking artist with intrinsic paths. His creative work consists of pen and ink drawing, writing and poetry, storytelling with the Pedestrian Dignity Project, economic and racial justice organizing, meditative practices, and creating scouting long-distance walking routes. His first book, Walk, Slow Down, Wake Up, and Connect at 1 to 3 miles per hour, Inclusive Stories and Practices, North Atlantic Books, is now available. Much of his work can be found on his website, and he is supported by an incredible patron community. So without further ado, Jonathan.
Thank you. Yay. So good. Well, I'm going to try sharing my screen, Annika, if I see if I can. Is that working?
Yes.
You all see it? Okay, awesome. So I'm so honored, so grateful to Pedestrian Space, to Annika and Alan and others involved, just organizing and weaving. This is, yeah, I love everything that this stands for, and it has been such a gift to be alongside Annika and this growing correspondence network. Every single gathering I'm able to attend is always so life-giving from a global perspective, and it's so nice to not feel alone in the space of being able to talk very much about these things endlessly all hours of the day. So having community to learn from each other, sharpen each other, it means a lot. So just so grateful to you all for all your effort in organizing. I'm going to start with a reading from chapter 3. It's titled Walking as a Human Right, and this is a visualization reading. And so I invite you to close your eyes if you want to, but maybe just take a deep breath and just we'll ground as I read this. So maybe a deep breath, deeply in, slowly out. Visualization, drenched and depleted. You are walking or moving in a wheelchair. You are en route to catch the only bus that goes where your medical appointment is. It runs every hour and sometimes doesn't show up at all. You know the buses in the early morning are more reliable. It rained heavy last night, and street medians, intersections, and paved over watersheds are flooded. You are dodging, skirting around, or having to go right through the water. You get splashed by rushing high-speed traffic. Because of the flooding, you have to go slower than usual. Your back hurts because you didn't sleep well. Your shoulders hurt because it's not good for you to carry all these groceries. Your glasses are fogged up and you can't wipe them. You're angry because you slipped and a can of soup went rolling into the gutter. Your mind is heavy because you are exhausted from the grind. Your heart aches because you never seem to get enough time with loved ones. Shit, you see the bus several blocks ahead. It is 10 minutes early. The no bench, no shelter bus stop is full of people waiting. You see them start to get on. You panic. Maybe you can make it if they take their time. Yelling won't help. You can't wave your hands. You pick up your pace, clench your bags, hold your pain, and try. There it goes. Everyone got on, except you. You worked so hard to arrive early too. You knew the weather would be bad. You knew you had to be quick at the store. The bus flies right by you, splashing you on the way out. You tried to wave your arms, make a scene, and ignite sympathy from the driver. Not today, not on most days. Cars continue to rush past you. No one sees you. Time turns to heavy mud. You must stand for the next hour and wait for the next bus, if it comes. No bench, no shelter, drenched, depleted. You could rest in a nearby cafe, but you have to buy something. You can't sit in the patch of thorny grass because it's soaked and would hurt your knees. You also need to use the restroom. Where could you possibly go? Hold it in. You will be shamed and fined if you go in public. Keep it in. So we'll pause for a moment. Just inviting you to allow this invitation to sink in any of the details that you remember from the reading. Maybe take a deep breath to really be with it, that this is the lived reality for millions of people every day. How does it make you feel? Have you ever felt this way related to your transportation experience? Why or why not? How might class, race, health, ability, and time spent in an automobile influence or impact your reflection? So thank you for letting me offer that reading. So much of my work, and not to start our gathering on a more heavy note, but it's so important to me related to the creative work that I do to ground the complexity of moving the way we're made to move. People walking, using a wheelchair, using a powered scooter, taking transit, wherever that looks, however that looks, with the paces and the bodies and the abilities we have with children, with elders, and to ground it into this is such, and in my context, hyper-focused on the USA, but everywhere, being so much built environment, centering the car, as many of us know and lean into around our work. But as an artist and someone who has moved with thousands of people, and someone who moves with people in these situations almost daily, every week, as an artist, it's so important for me to weave creative invitation around story, around the heart, around the lived, vibrating experience in the body. And so grounding in that story alongside the work I do with Pedestrian Dignity, but also alongside Walk to Connect and other projects. Everything in this book, just an overall frame around this book, is lived experience. It's rooted in encouraging and inviting and prompting felt knowledge. I know because I feel it. I know because I'm living through it, or I know because I'm beginning to experience it. I may be replacing car trips. I'm coming up with other plans, and now I'm starting to feel it on my skin and in my heart. And so it's not just the heavy and the hard, it's also the beauty and the benefit. And so throughout this whole book, there are themes and chapters. I'm going to go to this next slide. This bold piece here at the front, this is a beautiful paragraph that was written by my publisher that I just loved as a summary. But for those craving to feel and embody. So every chapter has stories and small integration practices, and then larger dedicated practices at the end of each chapter. And we're going to talk through, and I'm going to just offer some tips for Walkshops at the end of it, for the second half of our presentation. And there are so many things that dot around all that in the book that you can have as a resource, as a tool, that you can use to read to the group. So I always encourage just the reading that I just offered for people to use that same reading in meetings, in their workshops, in their organizing, to just invite people to ground into the body and the heart a little bit. How do we get creative to really bring people in, and not just keep it in concepts? And so that's so much of what this book roots in, meeting people right where you are, not, trying not to be, you'll hear it in my voice, I can be fiery and loud and intense and strange, and it shows up in the book, but it's really meant to be this book is meant to meet you where you are, right where you are, with your pace, with your practices. And so I really intentionally, very intentionally, use themes like human dignity, presence, slowing down to be present to our bodies and to our neighbors and to our communities. Themes of earth care and climate action and how it relates, that moving through the world in a humble, unhurried, attentive way. organically and genuinely connects us to things happening in the biosphere with the trees and the birds and the sky and the water systems. So chapter 4 is walking as earth care, that a practice in and of itself that we can be doing. I don't know what to do about the planet or about what, start slowly walking or moving and witnessing it, listening to it, paying attention to it, learning about where the water comes from near you, learning about the types of trees that are near you and how they help us breathe, learning about the migrating birds, learning about, so as you're slowly moving and relating, you know, this all ties, for me as an artist, it all ties together around how do we protect and honor our most human pace, as a teacher, as an invitation. So there's lots of things about that. There's a lot of stuff in the book about my own story. I have a chapter called Walking as Resistance. And so I move in a lot of activism advocacy spaces. So just thinking about the framework of protests. Antonia's book does a great job of framing this out too, but just people moving in mass, whether that's in protest or it's in memory, like in memory and honoring of lives, or a parade even, but masses of people moving through a space. People pay attention. There's a vibration that happens when people are moving en masse through a space. And I know each of you know this in your own experience in your mind, but how is this how are we forming this as a part of our walkability, walkable community, pedestrian safety, public health practices? How are we shaping movements of actual people moving through space and time as a strategy, and as a resistance energy, a resistance to speed, a resistance to even spending too much time behind the screen, but organizing to resist these defaults that are disconnecting us and move into these more inherent ways of being. So things like that. I also talk about vulnerability, topics connected to our emotional world imperfections, because I care a lot about how do we relate to each other, how do we listen to each other, and moving alongside is a huge part of that. So I'm going to offer a small, so in between, so chapter 1, very intentionally, is titled Walking as Human Dignity. And this is primarily from so many experiences, so many, I can't even count, moving with shoulder to shoulder people of all different backgrounds and abilities and lives. This on my cross-country walk in 2010 with Walk to Connect, where we would host hundreds of walks, roles, training leaders. What can be gained when we are moving next to each other? And I love to frame it as like, if you think about human bodies moving, like just the context of human bodies moving forward, physically moving forward, underneath our true ceiling, a big open sky where trees are helping us breathe, helping the actual movement. There's another great book, In Praise of Walking, that I quote several times by Shane O'Mara, and he breaks down the neuro benefits, the neuroscience of walking or moving in an unhurried way, and what happens to be creative around complex social and political issues. So are we using our brains and our neural networks the way that we could as we are thinking and brainstorming with our teams to be emergent and creative around how we engage politically, socially? Are we shedding stories that aren't serving us, or words or frameworks, jargon, and using our creative maps the way we're made to be shaping new stories, and stories that are relevant to where we are and where we want to go. So Walking as Human Dignity is a huge invitation, and it's why it's chapter 1. So I'm just going to read this essay. Some of it's going to be a little repetitive from what I shared, but the first story I talk about at the beginning of the chapter. So all chapters start with a story. And this story is talking about a weekly walk that I would host for years with mostly older Iraqi senior women that were refugees here in Colorado. and all the things I learned from them and that they learned from each other as we moved, and all the gifts from that. So after that, I have a small integration practice called Respect and the Second Gaze. And it's a simple little practice. You'll see it right here. It's just a small little box in the book. And it's an invitation to look again, like as we move through spaces and places. How do we look again? Respect. And then after the practice, I have some small essays, and I'm just going to read this little essay of sorts afterwards. And it's titled Moving With. When you and I move alongside of one another, we are actively expanding our capacity to coexist. We invite and encourage shared experience and dialogue. It anchors us into a more primal way of being. How often are we examining and evolving around how we learn, lean in, and connect with the unique life experience of another? An unhurried pace that is patient, open, undefended, and humble is a force, especially in this time. Dr. John Francis, one of my personal heroes and author of Planet Walker, who walked for 17 years in silence, shares, listen to actively learn. Be prepared to hear something new without judgment, and listen to what you have heard before from the place where you are now. Learning may come from a new understanding of what you already seem to know. Y'all, John Francis, how many of you, have you all heard of Dr. John Francis? Anybody in here? Oh my gosh. A couple, yeah, Darren, a couple of you. So just a little bit of context. Black man walking in the US in the, was it the 80s or the 70s? For 17 years in silence, raising awareness, 17 years in silence, raising awareness for climate change and environmental justice. That book is incredible. It's called Planet Walker. I'll just leave it at that. It's so layered, but his thoughtfulness around how do we move through space and time, and how do we teach each other and grow with each other and learn from each other is really profound to me. So I encourage you checking it out. So I continue on. The consumption machine. See, I get a little fiery in here. Wants us to avoid what is raw and fragile related to our personal and shared existence. It demands for us to numb pain and ignore all signals to live a more honest and present life. It works day and night to have us define our lives and relationships by what we consume or produce, how much we consume or produce, and how often we consume or produce. Moving in a way where one's posture on the earth is tender and attentive is healing and radical in and of itself. When you move this way, eye contact, common struggle, and time begin to thread cords of trust and connection. These embodiments allow for any number of invitations to more organically and authentically know, listen, and learn from other people and our deeper selves, right where they are, right where we are. More elbow to elbow, hip to hip, heart to heart, and wheels to feet, human listening, opening and connecting is such a tangible thing each of us can do to weave connection in this time. As we move, the radical diversity of the planet moves with us, allowing us to be curious, open, and loving alongside the radical diversity in each other. Our journey to each other drastically needs more practices, tools, and spacious environments to inspire more flowing, nuanced, and dignified connection. So I know in even reading that, it's a lot of words. It's a lot of kind of nice things, maybe things that we can try and lean into. But I think what really pushed me to finish the book, because y'all, writing a book is hard. Hardest thing I've ever done. One of the hardest things I've ever done. I would throw this thing in the drawer. I'd throw it 30 feet across the room. I'd fantasize about setting fire to it. It was hard. But I think the thing that pushed me over the edge to write it was this ache at the end of that reading, really around how can we really bring intention and creative intention around moving dialogues with people in our life, even our own relationships where there's conflict, to intentionally say, let's move with this. With our teams and our colleagues, let's move with this. Let's go outside. Let's get creative. Let's do the things we're made to do while we're moving. Let's move. Let's be alongside of each other, and let's try and go into the tension. Let's go into some of the hard stuff. So curating these experiences, not only with people in your life, but with your teams, with public agencies. So as we get into later with the Walkshops, this is kind of setting a foundation for why Walkshops or walking or rolling events are so impactful, because you're maximizing all these other benefits of moving the way we're made to. Minds are more open, hearts are more in touch, our bodies are regulating oxygen and blood, we're moving outside, all these things that seem obvious but aren't obvious when we think about how often are we actually doing this with each other and with our teams. And then the harm of our environments making that really difficult and even impossible for so many. So I want to offer another reading, if that sounds okay, another story for you. And this is a little bit on a lighter note, so we're going to move into a lighter space. This is from the chapter Walking as Play. And you'll notice in the book I have, so Darren, if you were here earlier, was mentioning some pen and ink art prints. So I do pen and ink artwork. I take sketchbooks and pens with me, and I draw and process things. So that's a part of my, you'll see some of the prints in the screen. This is how I sustain a lot of my work, and it's how I express a lot of the things that I'm trying to put out into the world. So Walking as Play, chapter 7, Beckoning the Inner Child. As soon as they were dropped off, and after a few strange looks, we started moving. Within minutes, they wanted to search for good walking sticks. I always had a walking stick with me, and they immediately wanted one too. Each of the boys, one 7 and one 9, eventually found one that worked for them. Their mom connected to our journey a couple of days prior and felt that it would be fun to have her boys join me for a few hours. I always loved moving and meeting young people in big open spaces. I had several parents, mostly homeschoolers, drop their kids off throughout my long walk. Just want y'all to be with that for a minute. I was on this long walk and parents would just drop their kids off. Happened 3 times at least. And they're just like, hey, I got things to do. Can my kids walk with you for a couple hours? I'm like, wow, trusting. The first time I learned quickly, I didn't have the mom's phone number or anybody's phone number. So I was like, oh God, like 2 hours hit. And I'm like, I hope they're coming back. I remember always feeling awestruck and inspired by their level of trust. I learned quickly into my cross-country walk that nearly everyone, no matter the age, would eventually feel lighter and more themselves after a good 15 to 20 minutes of movement. As we moved, we talked about family, hobbies, and what excited each of them. The questions came rolling in. What does Kanoa mean? This is my blue heeler husky dog. What does Kanoa eat? Does he like kids? Is he a wolf? Do you ever ride on his back? Can I ride on his back? Where does he sleep? Where do you sleep? How big are your feet? Where do you pee? What do you eat? Why do you walk so much? There was no shame in any question. Do you ever accidentally poop on your shoes? All real questions. In less than an hour, we were singing, laughing, and stopping to explore everything that showed up along the road. We were alive. They climbed on hills, I would follow. Their eyes would widen at the sight of slowly moving beetles, so would mine. They examined an old rusty toy that was tossed out of a car window. I was curious with them. They yelled and sang, so I yelled and sang. They pretended their sticks were swords, so I did the same. Play and wonder spilled from their pores. It also started to spill from mine. What could I climb next? What could we explore together? We saw a snake slither away and watched it until we couldn't see it anymore. We stopped to look at flowers and bugs. We threw rocks at nearby fence posts. The first one to hit the post 3 times won. We had colorful and lengthy conversations with the cows and horses we passed along the way. We dug up dirt and took breaks under trees. I learned so much from these two. In just 2 hours, we found a way to connect and play beyond the world of cars, walls, screens, and rigid relationships to time. I was reminded of how dull adulting has become. Even as I worked to break free from so many molds on this walk, the 2 boys made it clear just how much I was still missing. There were and are so many opportunities around us to be in constant wonder and play. At the 2-hour mark, the youngest one was done. His face started to cave in and the moping began. It was time for Mom to pick them up. As she drove away, they held onto their sticks in the back seat while waving out the windows, screaming, "Goodbye, Kanoa." Kanoa really was the star. And so many things from that story. Simple, but right after that, in the next chapter, I have a section called Jump, Kick, Climb, Swirl, and Sing. The integration practice after is called Get Wet. And then there's a story from my dear friend, Reverend Dr. Dawn, who is an amazing Black woman organizer here in the US, doing a lot of amazing things, talks about kind of the relationship of play, but also rest, and how we think about rest. And the title of the story is called Inviting Ease. And so thinking about just, you know, how does moving the way we're made to as an intention, or just honoring it as a system and as a way of being in the world. So those that don't have the choice, but to move this way, but thinking about natural occurrences of play and spontaneous connections and ease, being able to more easily take a breath by the tree or notice the sunset or be in a connection to your body, even if it's just for a couple minutes. And so there's all these themes that weave together throughout this book. And I care so much about having them weave together and just being experiments. I think just because I've hosted so many walking, movement, rolling events that range topics and themes, you know, it's become such a teacher to me that so many of these things are integrated, and that they can also be creative incubators for inviting new and more people into the specifics of pedestrian safety, pedestrian awareness, walkability, organizing, and storytelling and advocating, that getting really creative with how do we invite people into not only the harm, but the benefits, the inherent, intrinsic, playful. Kids are welcome here. I can unclench the grip and allow my children to just teach me how to climb a tree again, or at least lean on one. You know, so all these different things that that I think all flow down the same stream as it relates to walking and mobility and moving the way we're made to. So I want to share 2 other things from the book, and then we're going to move into Walkshop conversation. And then we'll have just time for any questions. Yeah, there's so much. I could spend hours just taking you through the book. But I thank you for just listening and leaning in. So I want to just share at the end of chapter 1, and this is kind of a bridge to Walkshops. Walking is human dignity. There's the dedicated practice. And the dedicated practice is titled Walk to Connect. And this is basically a very brief 101 on how we would conduct what we would call walking movement leader trainings. These are usually 3 to 6 hour trainings that we would do for years with public health agencies, state transportation departments, community organizations, nonprofits, cross-cultural, multilingual, or I mean, we would do these things with schools and children being the leaders, youth being paid, to lots of different groups, and very intentionally exploring lots of different groups to bring more invitation around moving this way. And so I'm just going to read the introduction of this a little bit, and I'm not going to go through the whole thing. So this is titled Dedicated Practice. You'll see it here at the end of the first chapter, Walking as Connection. Adrienne Marie Brown, an amazing author and teacher, if you don't know who she is, an amazing book called Emergent Strategy, writes, move at the speed of trust. Focus on critical connections more than critical mass. Build the resilience by building the relationships. Ooh, I'm going to read it again. I just love it. Move at the speed of trust. Focus on critical connections more than critical mass. Build the resilience by building the relationships.
Okay.
Creating movement environments where a group of people can let down some of their guard. So this is where I'm just kind of framing the practice a little bit. Creating movement environments where a group of people can let down some of their guard, open up with others, notice the world around them, and check in with their deeper selves inspires me to no end. Throughout my time at Walk to Connect and beyond, I have hosted uncountable walking experiences rooted in connection and trust. We all benefit from spaces that help us feel seen. We all benefit from practices that push us to fumble with words, questions, and responses to get to know people who are different than we are. We all benefit from creative approaches that move us away from walls, screens, positions, and affiliations, and into one another's physical, energetic vibration. There are endless arrangements for how to shape a practice like this. I have listed some examples below and have chosen to focus on the formation of a group. Movement with a group, when nurtured and cared for, can be an incredible pathway to human dignity. I have seen thousands of people experience profound healing, connection, and understanding across a wide variety of lines and differences when moving this way. And so as a strategy, as an intention to start hosting intentional movement groups with your neighbors, with your neighborhood, with your families, with your colleagues, like just crafting. And so I go into planning. There's some notes on some things to consider when planning related to audience, related to theme, related to route, related to style. So I offer some tips, and we'll talk about some of those here in a few minutes. And then I really get into some thoughts on preparation and invitation, circling up and the power of how to do that, or ideas for how to do that, both before and after your events, and then nurturing comfort, connection, and movement while you are moving. Extra safety notes, and then just some different tips on time and location. The last little thing I want to share is chapter 3. This is connected to this one, is the last practice. There's a really, I do some spoken word a lot with, there's a frame called Waking Up, a Human Right. And this is at the end of chapter 3. And I'm just going to read a couple lines. And this is quoting James Baldwin. It took many years of vomiting up all the filth I'd been taught about myself and half believed before I was able to walk on the earth as though I had a right to be here. And that's by James Baldwin. And so I go into the spoken word. And so I read this often as I'm hosting events with state departments and city departments and community. And I'm saying this is not, nobody's being shamed here. Nobody's being, but I really try and invite people in just to be with these aches. And I kind of go in, I have a right to move the way I am made to. I have a right to feel safe, comfortable, and connected to my surroundings. I have a right to nourish my cells, neurons, and breath with healthy movement. I have a right to process emotion, stress, and trauma the way I am made to. I have a right to be connected to the natural world. I have a right to physically move next to loved ones, neighbors, strangers, and friends. Black families and children have a right to feel just as safe on public streets as white families and children. Indigenous families and children have a right to feel just as safe on public streets as white families and children. People with disabilities have a right to walk or roll safely and comfortably on public streets. Transgender people, non-binary people, and all non-conforming people have a right to walk or roll safely on public streets. Women have a right to walk or roll safely and comfortably on public streets. We, the beloved human story representing all races, gender identities, sexual orientations, abilities, ages, and backgrounds, have a right to safely move by foot or on a wheelchair on all public streets. Inviting breath, inviting connection, but just the power of spoken word and poetry. I ended up reading the whole thing. I had to read the whole thing. I could just do a few lines, but it's another example of being creative with how do we move from the mind down into our hearts and I think our broader common care of other. So the last thing I'll just note about the book, and then we'll go into workshop stuff, is the dedicated practice after I share this, this spoken word piece is titled Felt Knowledge. And this is very similar to the Walk to Connect invitation, but it's very specific to hosting pedestrian dignity themed or walkability, rollability themed events, but centering it on lived experience, centering these events on practical behavior. And so it just gives tips on how you might consider grounding these events. Some of the things I've mentioned already related to getting creative with things you can bring into those events, sharing stories, co-creating these events with residents, with people who move through the world on wheelchairs, co-creating, horizontally creating, not like really trying to co-create from the beginning these experiences. And then the vantage points of, if I'm already walking, rolling, and riding public transit as my primary form of transportation, here are some things that you might consider. Try making your personal experience more public. Start some storytelling. Start taking a couple more photos. Start, even if it's just writing notes or making audio around, this was awful, or this felt really good. And just finding ways to move those a little more publicly, and getting creative with how you might record those things with whatever capacity you have. And then it really leans a lot of the invitation is that driving is your primary form of transportation, and how to think through inviting people into experiencing this for probably the first time, you know, in this sort of way. Because most of the events that I've hosted, and I'm talking hundreds, y'all, are, I would say, easily 90% of the people who are joining and or the events just in total. It is the first time planners, engineers, and this is in the US, I'm sure it's linked in other places too, but have ever walked on said corridors, or have never taken transit, because I would always build a bus route or a transit route as the way back from the way out. And so this is why it's so important. You're grounding. And so I have my story in chapter 3 talks about one of those experiences in the learning arc of that, which is it's just an important story connected to this. So that's just a summary of the book. Thank you for letting me read some spoken word and a couple of stories, and just being here and listening to this. It's a very personal book. You'll see it doesn't easily fit into any one genre, and that's very intentional. A lot of people will see Walk on the shelf, or they'll see it on my, you know, I do art markets and I have them, and, you know, they're just like, oh, it's a fitness book. And I'm like, well, not really a fitness book. I mean, there's some things connected. Oh, it's an organizing activism book. Well, yes, but it's also some other things. So it's been fun to play with, like, being creative even in the writing, and to find a publisher who was willing to work with me on a creative nonfiction piece. So I hope you are able to enjoy it in your own way. And I can't, if you were annoyed by my voice, or if you liked my voice, the audiobook has been, I did the recording for it and I got really into it. So that's another invitation, is to take it with you while listening. So, and if you have any questions, if you're wanting to do any like bulk orders or for your teams, please reach out, because I definitely have some discounts that I can get from the publisher. So, okay. And we'll have time for questions. I want to go into workshops now. So looking at time, 10:52. let's take a deep breath. If you need to stand, take a minute to move the blood a little bit. It's a pretty natural bridge from where I finished, but just take a drink, check in with the body for a minute. Okay. So I'm going to be crunching this down into such quick tips. So please, there are so many layers to this. I'm sure a lot of you have experienced this in your own way. You could add to these lists. So please track any questions when we go into Q&A. I'm thinking we'll do about 25 minutes of this, and then we'll have maybe 10, 15 for some Q&A, and we can go a little longer if we want to, for those who can stay. But there's two main seeds that you've heard me talk about this already, so I'm not going to go into it too much. You'll notice at the bottom here, chapter 1 in walk and chapter 3 in walk. But the two seeds I like to plant are just to broaden the idea of Walkshop. So the first seed is, I call it base building. How are we meeting people where they are in their curiosity and interests related to moving at an unhurried pace, 1 to 3 miles an hour, walking or rolling? And so how can we host and support and be a part of creating movement events that are focused, that don't have to center and only be focused on urban planning and engineering and advocacy and pedestrian safety, but how can we create invitations that just are helping kids and families and people move in creative ways that are helping people make meaningful connections? And then very intentionally plant some of those seeds on those events related to advocacy and safety and accessibility. So people might be out on a history walk or roll. They might be out on a cross-cultural, multilingual Spanish-English walk. They might be out on a walk where they're learning about transit. They might be learning about geography. They might be learning about local herbs and plants. They might be on a walk with an arborist. But then how are those events dotted with invitations to engage in understanding one's environment from a safety and dignity and pedestrian mobility lens? And so you can get so creative with this. The second thing is very specific walkability, rollability workshops that are just hyper focused on a very specific measuring audit that's a specific intersection, and we're moving around it to understand the behavior and the safety and the access in this intersection. But where I always like to push and pull out a little bit is really pushing the full pedestrian behavior trip from A to B. Because so often walk audits or walkshops that I see, and it all is good, we need all of them, but so often I see it, they're hyper focused on the specific built environment piece. And there is behavior related to moving through said piece, but there's seldom relating to from A to B. Where is the public housing? Where is the grocery store? What are the bus routes? And so we're going to meet with residents because we've spent time co-creating this with residents, and we might even have stipends for those residents to support them for their time to come up with a plan together around how do we want to tell a story of what everybody in this apartment is going through every day in all weather, from here to the grocery store, while we also then talk about the specific intersection opportunities, gaps. And so I think there's so much more room for us to tease out working with community and co-creating experiences that center what people live every day, and then bringing in those tangible built environment invitations. So those are just two seeds. There's so much there. And I have lots of ideas and examples. So if you have questions on those, please take note of any of those. Have hosted so many in either category and have seen some really cool things happen where so many people from that first seed become advocates because they've been invited in a way that teaches from all those different sides of lived experience. So a couple tips related to planning, pacing, and preparing. The photo here is from an event that we did that we co-created with some folks from the Pedestrian Dignity Network. This is Sheridan. So one of you were talking about, are you still with us? I think you said you might have to leave. Oh, Geert, okay, you're still here. Yeah, so this is on the other, this is further south on Sheridan. And this route that you're seeing here has a park, one of the most popular north-south bus routes in the city of Denver, grocery stores, public housing, and everyone for this block and a half, 2 blocks behind me are forced into the street. People who are really able-bodied can walk and skirt the dirt hill, but how many years, how many decades? And we had the senior engineer who'd been managing Sheridan Boulevard for 20 years from the state, and this was his first time ever walking the corridor. That's why these are so important. This 20 years managing a corridor, and you've never walked it. So really not trying to shame this person, but really trying to invite, like, this is a systemic issue. This is a problem that people who are managing and making big decisions on funding and design aren't activating lived experience in other modalities. So tips, planning, pacing, and preparing, story and route scouting. So I just encourage, what's the story you want to tell with your walk shop or roll shop? You know, like what are those stories? And really importantly, who is telling it with you? So I just really want to anchor in co-hosts that are residents, people who live with mobility devices, planners, engineers, youth and students, getting young people involved, inviting a couple reaching out to high schools and colleges to say, hey, we've got this event that we're co-creating. You go to this school. Are there any students that might be looking for some learning opportunities or capstone projects, or anybody that's working in like environmental justice, or anybody, like, reach out. If you don't have personal connections to schools, getting some of these young people to be involved is huge. As you think about your budgets for outreach and education, if you're working with an organization, thinking about from the beginning some level of stipends for people if you are encouraging them to co-create this with you. Just to be thinking about that, like have it as a part of your process from the beginning, and honoring their dignity and time, because you know it's a complicated relationship to talk about something that is so hostile and harmful and unsafe, and making the time to plan it and be a part of it and really be honored to do that. So who is telling the story with you? So this woman here, Phyllis, her and I have been in the Powered Scooter. We've been co-organizing events for years. And we're always checking in throughout the whole thing, before and after, to kind of co-create what do we want to tell, where do we want to stop people. We go out and we scout the routes. This is the next bullet: pre-walking and pre-rolling the routes. Highly encourage that you're doing this with people who have mobility, who use mobility devices. You know, none of these are rules. This is not about perfection, but just lean into those edges around, is this telling the most honest, full story that it can? You know, how is it really showing the gaps and the harms that people face? And the way Phyllis's powered scooter specifically, and the nuances between a powered scooter and a manual wheelchair, you know, understanding those nuances. Phyllis in a powered scooter gets stuck, especially in winter. I mean, planners and engineers that have moved with us have learned so much from Phyllis, by way of an hour and a half or 2-hour walk turns into a 3.5 hour experience because of how much Phyllis gets stuck in her scooter. And so all of those things. And then we also at different events will have available manual wheelchairs that people can ride as they move. But I'm always encouraging that you're doing that in relationship with people who are using mobility devices already, that you're really co-creating that invitation with them. The other note is timing and pacing. I talk a little bit about it up here, but it's really just thinking about things like, as you're scouting the route, accessibility, public restrooms, starting location. What's a good starting location? Is it near a bus route? Is it near transit? Can it be? If not, am I communicating that? Pacing for all abilities. So really thinking about time. If you are able-bodied or you move at a certain pace, really planning the event in a very spacious way, knowing that so many different paces show up to these experiences. And really honoring that and being flexible if people aren't able to finish the event, and how do you kind of co-create alternative stopping spots and things like that, depending on those things. So just kind of having that flexibility, not having too many expectations, because pace is a big deal when doing these things. Workshop tips, finding the people. So these are just some added tips. One of the big things is, how do we get people, how do we get people to show up? Who do we want to show up? Different things. And this is, spans endless promotional tips and communications tips. But again, this also anchors back into co-creating with residents and hosts as hosts. So when you're co-creating with residents tell other residents, like the word of mouth starts to happen. So you get really natural involvement from neighbors and neighbors and neighbors and people that are connected to residents by way of them being involved from the beginning and co-creating this with you. So there's that natural word of mouth that happens. But really having, like, what is our goal for the event? So gaps and opportunities related to lived experience for residents, specific intersections, equity gaps for commuters, student family safety, maybe everything. But if there are certain things that you really want to highlight, then really using that goal to then steer who are you really inviting to this with more attention and intention. It really helps to have to send a message to a specific elected official saying, hey, we're doing an event based on the behavior from people living in this part of your district going to this grocery store. It's really unsafe. We have residents, or we are the residents that are organizing this with this project. And we want, so rather than blanket generic email with so many people kind of hidden in BCC or flyers that just go out, like really being intentional around inviting certain people because of their relationship to that district or to that project. That, I know that might seem obvious, but it's a big deal when it comes to people protecting time and setting you up for really being able to shape what you're saying and educating and inviting throughout the route, to keep them accountable to these things. Can be very focused on engineering, on planning. It can be focused on just broader education with youth and students. I just shared, or I just connected with someone on TikTok. I do pedestrian dignity on social media, and someone was just sharing an amazing story, video story of his main purpose for this event was to simply educate high school and middle school kids on pedestrian issues. And so there was maybe 30 kids and teachers, and he really wanted to, because I think his own connections to children and kids, so he just focused it on that target. So just thinking creatively around, instead of just these broad workshops, who do I want to target? And maybe I won't need to do a lot of outreach because I'm going to specifically reach out to these specific schools or groups, and that's the target. Or maybe the target is, I'm only looking at planners and engineers within my city or region or district. Forming the invite, these are obvious things, but I just want to highlight them. Plenty of time in advance. I encourage to have 2 scheduled if you can, doing at 2 different times or 2 different days. I think you're just maximizing all the time that you put into planning it, and you're also giving people options, and you're giving people who join the first one to share with their colleagues or friends to come out to the second one, and that happens a lot. So it's just encouraging that you lean into doing 2 if you can, if you're focusing on something pretty specific and you're putting a lot of time into the program of it. Daytime can work. These are just tips, but daytime can work pretty well if you're focusing on people in agencies and people working in the field. But if you're focusing more on the public or on community, evening or weekends, I found are usually better. And then just being specific as you can in the invitation is really helpful. You know, the broad, like, hey, we're walking, like pedestrian safety on this street, you know, like we're focusing on intersections between this public housing site, or we're focusing on intersections between the park and the school, this park and this school, or we're focusing on, you know, just being as specific as you can in that first summary paragraph under the event, whether it's on a flyer or on a website or in an email, is really helpful. So I just encourage being specific as much as you can and following up. If you email folks or send things out, so just giving yourself plenty of time to organize, you know, in that way. Storytelling and media. So this is an area where I spend a lot of my time with pedestrian dignity in particular, but in all areas. So during your walk, shop, or roll shop, plan to share lived experience stories. Where are residents coming from? Where are they going? So really working with these residents and helping them as much as they want or would invite help, like not assuming they need help, but just like, hey, like, are you open to sharing your story? And this is again where the stipend and the support and the childcare and the meals or whatever you're doing in these spaces is in building relationships. It's back to that initial quote. Instead of as many people as possible, how am I building trusted relationships and dedicated connections? So how many times might it take for me to go to the community meeting to just listen and be a part of the community meetings to then maybe co-create an event together? So this might take months of just listening and planting seeds rather than going in full force and being like, hey, we're doing a walk. Do you want to lead it with us? It's like, well, let's just lean in and take some time and build some connections in other ways and learn more about the community that you're living in, working in. But sharing lived experience stories in the event is so important, especially if you're doing this with elected officials. If you've got elected folks, having the residents share their stories is so important. Offer readings, poetry, spoken word, statistics. So getting creative with how to, you know, just break up some of the things we talked about already. Remind participants of additional, I always encourage that you're reminding participants around additional weather, like just saying, like, imagine this environment in the winter with ice, with rain, with the heat, like just that you're prompting that awareness, because people will just be moving and they're taking in what they see or what they experience, but you're prompting added awareness around other circumstances that people face every day. And I'll just go back up. I missed the one part related to sensory experience. Smells, sounds, vibrations. So another prompt is to pause people. If you like, are you all really listening to how loud this is? Like, I want us to stop and pause and be with the sound of the cars rushing past us, or the sound maybe even of the trains in a certain way, if it's like more, you know, utility trains, whatever the smells of an incinerator or energy companies or sewage, and how does that relate and connect to bus stops and transportation outside of cars where people can escape those things. So you're anchoring into the senses and inviting participants to really feel those things, and not just like, oh, it smells bad, God, that sucks. But like every morning, every day, there are millions of people having to move with this. And how are we just taking that in, and specific people that live in these specific areas, like inviting conversations about class and race and segregation, and just being, you know, and doing that with community. Record and document throughout experience. So recording and documenting as much as you can safely. So for sharing later, we often, pedestrian dignity, certain people be like, you're just looking for media attention, you're not actually serious. I'm like, you're right, we're looking for media attention. We want more people paying attention to this. We want people seeing it and feeling it. Like, so that's an intention that I've brought into pedestrian, that we've brought into this project, but it's also something that it holds its own accountability when we can share. Like this visual that you see with Phyllis says so much about a built environment that, you know, just having words you know, it's just the visuals are so important. And then inviting local media and press or photographers, video producers, radio hosts, podcasters to join, interview, record throughout the experience. We have had so much media coverage, and it's been really positive, and every time, mostly every time, even the media is like, this is the first time I've ever experienced this, and it's horrifying. And I drive this road every day, or I've driven it for 10 years. So even from a media, you know, anybody who's joining and leaning in, you know, and the awareness of, as I shared earlier in the related to the resistance chapter, you see the people in this photo here, the cars would honk at us because we're disrupting their traffic flow. And we would have to communicate with our hands, like, look, there is nowhere else to go. And they would just honk, and then they would usually see Phyllis or someone on the mobility device, and they would stop honking, and they'd have their own kind of learning experience from the car, because it's hard. You're in a car and you don't have the vantage point of, so, but it's from the driving lens, even it's an advocacy and awareness and outreach opportunity from drivers who are assuming they should be able to get wherever they need to go as fast as possible, and the complexity of being challenged there by a group of moving pedestrians. So the last, there's so much in the Walkshop space, but the last little note here that I'm just going to share on, and then we'll just go into some time for questions and connection, is just the encouraging to share things with pedestrian dignity. So letting us be a media partner, community partner, just even if you're just out individually taking photos and videos of things, or if your group is or organization is, there's a submission form on the link tree below, and it's just uploading a video or a photo. I put plenty of tips on just how to think about doing some of those things, and I'll just share, like, these media tools are messy. I love them and I hate them, y'all. It's hard for me to stay on social media. It's hard. I am constantly surprised and encouraged from a place of meeting young people, mostly where they are 20s, 30s, in this bridge of civic engagement, civic advocacy through the lens of pedestrian mobility, that I'm finding on TikTok and Instagram and through some of these tools. The amount of engagement that I get on these tools is it is incredible. And the things that I'm hearing from young people, what they're learning from these videos. And the thing about some of these tools is it just, you know, it encourages people to then get away from their screens and see these things and feel these things. So there's a tension. Don't feel any pressure to do this on media, but I encourage, if you want to lean in, and I just put some tips here, anything related to positive and negative examples of what pedestrians, people walking and rolling, go through on a daily basis, anywhere across the world. Pedestrian, it's not meant to be just here in Colorado, it's anywhere. Anything that captures pedestrian behavior in unsafe, inaccessible, car-centric environments, anything that models positive walking, rolling environments, how it feels, why it is positive, what it does for community, health, and planet, and keep it basic too. I always encourage, like, keep it basic. Like, sometimes it's, if you've got a really nerdy thing and you want to get into it, that's great. But like, so many people are literally learning these things or leaning into these things for the very first time as a concept, as something to pay attention to, as something to organize around, as something to make the connection. They might experience it every day, but they're not making the connection that they can change it or organize it, or that it's an issue. And so that's why I'm encouraging, like, be in your senses a little bit, or be in, like, the lived experience, like, this is where I'm walking, this is where I'm trying to go, this is. So just playing with how that media storytelling helps connect a wider audience of people, and not just people that understand it already. documenting groups and workshops. So if you're hosting events, just taking photos or workshops, I encourage vertical photos because it's easy for us to share on our stories, and you'll be tagged and all of those things. So you'll send me all that info if you want to do this. And any local organizing, advocacy, planning projects that are happening where you are. Like if we can just help get the word out on things that are happening to provide more examples, that's great. 30 seconds or less, vertical, as I shared, voiceover or text to go over them. Specific location is helpful. Any agencies that we can tag to help them see, or elected officials that can help them see the video, we try and do that. So I say we do have a network of amazing people, but it's really at this stage mostly me and it's burning me out, but I love it. So please send me things that come up for you. Well, there we go. There it is. There's just some good seeds and different invitations around the book and workshops. So yeah, just open to any questions, ideas, thoughts. Thank you for leaning in and being a part of it.
Go ahead, Anne, if you've got a question.
Well, I think also Zvi just raised his hand too. If maybe he can go first because he beat me to it.
You can go first if you want, it's no problem.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was just thinking, thanks very much. That's the first time I had the opportunity to hear the overview of your work and such, and I still haven't gotten the book, so I have to catch up a little bit. But very interesting. And in one general observation, it's interesting that the Colorado Department of Transportation was the first one in the US to decide not to invest further in highways, highway expansion and such. And I wonder if there's some connectivity to the fact that you've had some of those state officials on these walks. And again, the highway is not the same as a major road that you were showing, but I just want to reflect that because I do think that advocacy and that connection is really important. And related to that, actually, I advocate for the Association of Pedestrian Bicycle Professionals in the US to try to expand our membership. And so I'll throw that out there too, because I think your network might want to connect.
Yes.
Trying to get more engineers and planners to join to have that perspective of the walk and bike. But the question, I guess, related to that comment is, when you have had those state and local officials and you brought them, and you commented on this a little bit, but a little bit more about some of the aha moments, how that momentum went back to their agencies, how that kind of grew in Colorado. Because again, I'm in the state of Michigan. Michigan is a very car-centric for very many different reasons. And we have a few people, but that momentum around this space is weak. And so I'm curious. And I also lived in Boulder for a long time, so I got some connections there too, but different story.
Oh, that's awesome. Right on. Oh, it's such a great question. And thank you for that. Please, yeah, reach out to me or we'll connect and send me the info on the membership stuff so I can share it. Yeah, so much of this I just describe as very, as you can imagine, it's not overly transactional. We do an event and you're like, all of a sudden there's a sidewalk and an intersection. But it is absolutely having an impact internally, and we very intentionally with our messaging throughout these events are putting it with our asks are more like, we want to trust that our agencies are taking risk internally. If we are going to continue organizing, which you're asking us to do, keep sending comments, keep getting people to organize, keep submitting reports, keep pushing the state reps and the elected officials, because we're, state departments in the US are mostly in the federal branch of governments, and elected officials are pushing those. So we're learning and we're aware of that. We're trying to do that, but we're really putting it back on them too. Like, help us trust that you all are moving things internally related to shifting the car-centric frameworks around your manuals and your trainings and all those things. And so the last several events, one of the Region 1 director who manages the Denver Metro, has basically, anytime we have a pedestrian dignity event, she's mandated that engineers, some of the engineers and planners that work on her teams go to these events. So even that is a positive, like, okay, that's happening. They're using terminology, pedestrian dignity, in their frameworks. All of them have been eyes wide open when they experience these events. They leave the event eyes wide open. I had no idea. And so when I hear that, I trust that there's and when you have young people and people on mobility devices and residents, speaking to, can we trust you? Really? Then it's like, you have this. So I would say, yeah, I'm seeing new sidewalks go in on Colorado Boulevard at an intersection that we've taken. We've hosted so many events. I'm seeing plans, the highway project that you're referring to, I-25 and other things. Yes, I'm sure that we are weaving. Is it tangible? Like, this is because there's a lot of people here organizing in Denver and Colorado and around all of us, but absolutely, there's impact, and it's just really meaningful to see. And the story I share at the beginning of chapter 3 was with one of the CDOT staff members who'd been there for 20 years or so. And at the end of our event, she was going to leave halfway through, had a lot of things going on. Halfway through, she canceled everything, continued to stay throughout the whole event. And at the end, my favorite quote, and I've carried it with me, is, for 20 years, I have had an intellectual relationship to transportation. And that solidified it. It was like, okay, this is an actual thing that we need to be doing more of, and not just one-offs, but really commit to as a strategy. So yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Zvi.
Thanks, Alan. Sorry, I should be.
Don't worry.
Thank you. So thank you very much. This has really been very intellectually stimulating. I'm curious,
Yeah, thank you.
are you familiar with the ciclovia concept as it's done in Colombia, not as it's done in the US?
Oh, as it's done, me?
Because it's really
give me a summary, just the difference.
In Colombia, it's a weekly thing. It's literally done every single Sunday from 10 to 3 in the afternoon. And it's really about equity. And so it's like a huge portion of the city. Basically, the idea is on 2 feet or on 2 wheels, everyone is the same, basically. So it's really about equity issues. And every week, they basically just, in Bogota, it's like over 100 kilometers of road basically are accessible every single Sunday by foot or by week. And there's no specific programming involved. It's just basically allowing people to go out and use that space any way they want. Like, there are whole cottage industries that have evolved around it and things. And it's not about necessarily, the idea is to imagine the city differently, and to realize that, it doesn't have to be this way. So, and it's really important that it's like the repetitiveness of it, like that it's really like a weekly thing, and it really changes perceptions. And so, in the US, like the equivalent of generally tend to be events, sort of like the kind of thing that you're talking about, where you program something and they like specifically, riding or walking in a specific area. Whereas in Colombia, it's like really, yes, you can walk there or you can ride your bike there, but that's not really the focus. It's actually, the focus is really just about imagining how the space could be different if it wasn't filled with vehicles all the time. And there are highway segments that are part of it. Like literally, like there's, like, it's crazy how far you can go. So anyway, I was just curious if you were aware of that. I mentioned in the chat, I think Montreal is sort of reaching, like we do have a lot of really interesting activism groups in Montreal, and we have for a long time. That at least in the 70s and 80s, there were some really creative groups that did a lot of amazing work to sort of change perceptions about access and things like that. So we've been working, so there's to some degree, there's more awareness of this, but I mean, the challenges remain. And as you said, enlightening the professionals who are in charge of this thing is really so crucial. Like this morning, like there was a really tragic fatality just a few days ago that had a very large outpouring of grief, basically. And the city's already done some interventions, but they already had done, like the citizens who live in the area for a long time have been demanding that the city do something, because it's an area, like there's school, like it's an urban neighborhood. But the problem is there's a bridge, a regional bridge that goes across the river that basically enters the city at that point. And there's like a lot of road work and things being done. And so you have like this very heavy amount of suburban traffic basically that enters the city at that point, and they're all stuck and they're like trying to find ways to go around. So it's like it's traffic chaos. And yet, there's like a school there as well. Like there are a number of schools there and parks and things. Like people live there. Like my kids, played soccer at that soccer field. And so anyway, so like the authorities have been trying to sort of guide the traffic in certain ways, but it's like very temporary things. Like the authorities are thinking about when is the rush hour, for example. And so they're like, okay, you can't turn left during the evening rush hour, but like during the morning when the kids are walking to school, you can. Like, so this kind of thinking is really it's still going on, and it's yeah. So we have our I think a lot of what you've suggested is to differing degrees is being integrated here. But it's great advice anyway. like you're
no, it's really good to hear, Zvi, and I think your note on repetitive is so important too, like to just as an experiment. Even we have like things here that are just, but you're right, they're one-time events, or they're a week long, or it's a season of having kind of activities on a street that are outside of car-oriented reality. And they're good, they're really good, but it's one of the things related to kind of that first seed I was planting, related to the simplicity of a weekly walk or roll. Every week at this time in this neighborhood, you're hosting an event. This is what Scotland is doing so well. Like Scotland is like got, I don't know how many thousands of walking leaders. And because of these weekly or monthly community walk roll events that aren't hyper focused on mobility and pedestrian, but you're getting people out to move with each other every week. And then they're connected to a larger community that invites people to pay attention to these things, or to join committee meetings, or to help advocate when things come up. But that weekly commitment of, I comb my streets every week as a community, even though it's not, the roads aren't closed and it's not everybody together, but it's the same thing probably with weekly bike rides, and but just the weekly commitment, but also the commitment threaded with invitations to engage around making this easier and safer and more human. So, and we've seen here with the weekly walks, like the people that are, and it's important that they're invested in, that it's not just it's a weekly social walk and it's just fun. Like that's great, and people do that and it's good. But the intention of bringing people, elected leaders, to join the events, and bringing to join the walks, to have themes once in a while, to invite people to be a part of these larger themes related to human mobility and walking, that it's not just social, get the coffee and go. Like that can happen, but every week, you're building relationships, and then you're being invited to take it to broad.
But it's really a challenge maintaining the level of engagement.
Yeah,
we
100%.
have, like now every borough basically has its own sort of pedestrians. Well, now we call it an active mobility sort of subgroup. And some are more active than others, and it's really a challenge to sort of maintain this ongoing vibrancy. Like when a tragedy happens, like a lot of people come out to mobilize, but then building on that is difficult, or while maintaining the momentum, basically.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's why I was just, when I went to Walk 21, I was just, my jaw was just dropping when I was listening to, and Alan, I'm curious if you experienced this where you are, but there were a couple people speaking from the UK and London, but then it was mostly Ireland and Scotland, and they were talking about the investment governments have made to have entire staff teams fully paid, but salaries, where you have multiple people hired with benefits as a profession working for the government, training and supporting walking leaders. I mean, it's like, it's that level of honoring that this is work, that it is needed, that it's a container of a profession, of something that weaves community and involvement. I don't know if you have that where you are. US is far from that.
In Quebec, it is quite interesting, actually. Like we do expect, like things that are done as volunteer work in many other places are expected to be actually an extension of government here. So like the para-public sector, where people are actually paid to do this kind of work, is very serious here, and very large. And there are a lot of groups that are working, who are paid actually to translate, change perspectives on streets as public space and whatnot. Like there's a number of groups who are doing really amazing work, and they have staff of maybe 20 people or more. But it's the change, the embracing change, and I think Anne mentioned. I think it's really institutional change at this point, and these institutions they're change averse, and historically departments of transportation were basically roadworks. They were literally sometimes called the Department of Roadworks, and they built roads. That was with big road projects.
Yeah.
So changing their, like having them work in partnership with a wider public is it's hard for them. Like they're just not used to it. And
absolutely. I know it's so hard. And I think that's the events with these folks is helping. It's just amazing how many eye-opening experiences are had, just bringing them out with care, and like that you're all here. This isn't a shaming event. We're all here. We're all imperfect. We're all trying, and we're going to talk about some of the harm, but also the opportunity. We're going to be real about like getting experimental with how we host these events, so it can kind of jolt the system a little bit, but keep people in the circle and not kick people out of it. Because that dance, I don't have answers to. Yeah, Alan.
No, I was just going to say, Anne, did you have a question there? Sorry.
You're on mute.
Yeah, sorry, I know, sorry, I just reached my mute on my button. You had mentioned in the presentation about having sessions at different times of day, et cetera, which I understand completely. I was wondering if you have ever had any sessions actually in the dark, because our streets in the US and North, many places the streets are so dangerous, it's bad enough during the daytime, or whether or not there's sidewalks, but then whether or not you've ever had an actual activity in the dark because it's even harder to catch the bus or walk or whatever.
Yeah, I'm so grateful you asked that. Yes, several, but which requires a whole nother level of communication, safety, and a lot of times I'll encourage events to happen, especially if it's with agencies, and depending on, again, who we're working with. Like if the residents feel comfortable, then they're, and they're kind of leading with some of that, then we kind of lean in. But we often we'll do events during rush hour as the sun's going down, as a story, as a very intentional, but the route itself changes in terms of where we stop and finish. But that's another planning piece. If you're going to do that in a storytelling way with intention, that you're thinking about, okay, probably going to be dark by the time we get here. Where do we want to stop the group? So those details of where do you put a group, you know, because a lot of these places may not have safe. So, and then communicating, if I'm yelling at you, it's because we can't hear anything because we're right next to traffic, and that's intentional. So people are like, God, this is a horrible meeting spot. We can't hear anything he's saying. Well, like get closer, because this is what people go through. So you ground it in people who are living this every day, but still keeping people, you know, safe. It's a tricky dance, but yes, I highly encourage, with, you know, some extra safety filters in mind, to do those things. I know, looking at chat, 11:38, Alan, we'll go to you, and then maybe we'll kind of close it after that, just to be mindful of time, if that feels okay.
Yeah, Nico was just remembering us that we've got to finish at some point. Got to.
I love it. I could go. Yeah.
Yeah. But no, I was just thinking that there's actually a good opportunity there to kind of take advantage of the network as well, and try and maybe put something together with, in collaboration, obviously, with Pedestrian Dignity, but try and put together kind of different stories and images of what you were saying, but doing this with people from all over the network. So it's not something too complicated, and we can all take our picture, tell a little story about that moment, or a small video, and we can all put that together as a network, and do it with Pedestrian Dignity as well. It would be really nice.
Oh, I would love it. I think that'd be such a great, yeah, I would love it. So let me know, Alan, if I can help with that, if you and I link up separately and talk through that more, or whatever. But if you need support, any other support from me for that, yeah.
We could have stories from all over the world of different experiences with walking, which could be amazing. Yeah.
Exactly. Such an opportunity, and it's already happening. Like, I'm already getting lots of global stories, especially on on both TikTok and Instagram, just people that are, I love it. And I think that's where it's like, it's already naturally happening. And so there's, even if there's ways, you know, if I can get creative with how I'm even sharing some of these global stories with the network, like how do I send them to you all in a way that you all can see them and learn from them too. And so I'll even be mindful of that. I think it'll be a natural, like, back and forth, like who's sending me things, you know. And a lot of it's from, you know, because it's TikTok and Instagram Reels, these are like college students or people studying urban planning in Mexico, and you know, in South Africa, or in, like, I've had a couple people in Kenya send me things. There's been, and these are a lot of people who are learning, they're growing up with more media, and it's a default area where they process what they're learning and seeing. And so it's just cool to get these 20-somethings sending me videos of sidewalks in Mexico that are, anyway, yeah. Yeah, I think it's really, really an opportunity for us to partner. So
we'll think. We'll speak to you as well, Jonathon, about that. See how we can get that going. I'll reach out to you and speak to you about that as well.
Awesome, that's great. That's very cool. Yeah, one of the last seeds I'll just share is one of the things that, and Darren, I think, he's not here anymore. But one of the things that we've been doing with him and his work with AARP in Wisconsin, I mean, it's hosting walking leader or walkshop leader trainings. So I've been doing that for about 12, 15 years. And we've got several trainings coming up in rural and suburban areas in Colorado, and going back out to Wisconsin for some of these things. So if you're ever, I don't know, just wanting some extra tips, or if you want some ideas for hosting these trainings, please reach out, because the training programs can be really great too, to get like a team of leaders kind of celebrated and committed to starting to host a certain kind of, like, just the community that can form around when you train a new group of people around these themes, has been pretty, the collaboration and the camaraderie is pretty inspiring. So just happy to help you all think through that. Sweet. Well, thank you all, Annika, Alan, everybody. Thanks for leaning in. Thanks for being here. It's 11:42, so just honoring time and just looking forward to connecting more in this network and stay in touch.
It's been fantastic having you here, Jonathan. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone. It's been a wonderful conversation.
Thank you, Jonathan. I just had one more thing I wanted to say. Is everybody still here?
Yeah.
Something I meant to say in the beginning. I was so excited. I was tripping over my words. First of all, thank you for a wonderful presentation. And there was something else I wanted to say about your work. In reading your book, and it also goes to all your other work and especially your art too, is that it brings in, I'm reading material on mobility constantly, but what is unique about your work is that it brings in an angle of the sacred, right? And the art that's in your book, it's sacred to me, really, sacred imagery. It's just there's an element of the divinity. This is why I was also excited to have this as the last roundtable of the year. Also in December, at least here in the global north, at least where I am, we're plunged in darkness and winter and this very special holiday month with so many holidays and different traditions. And so there was a connection to me to having this roundtable at this time, sacred, but also extraordinarily practical. So much, everything you shared today, these workshops, so that all of us in this network can take away. And I'm glad we're able to record this and also share it. And very excited to see what you and Alan are going to lead forward with there. And I did want to note, I put the link in the chat that you and I had worked on earlier this year, right? The tips.
Oh,
Tips.
yes, please put that in the chat. Yeah, I had meant to mention that. I pulled a photo from it in the presentation, so I forgot to mention that. Yes.
Yeah, that was fun. That was nice to collaborate on that, and that could also be used as some sort of template for what you and Alan go forward with too, guiding the network with because we have so much momentum in this network, and we just need people taking the helm, and advocacy is one of the pillars. Really, we're going to enter the new year with network pillars. Maybe we can chat with you about that too, because I think you would enjoy that chat. But I think advocacy is naturally one of the pillars of this network. Everybody present here is engaged with advocacy in some way. So I just want to say that it's an incredibly unique angle of your work to me, that it does bring in that call to the sacred as well. So and the practical. So thank you for putting this work out there and for everything, for everybody gathered too. We had a really neat, as usual, a really neat spread from the people across the globe, and I'll look forward to publishing this and tagging all of you.
And thank you for everything, for weaving and organizing us, and your words, your gift to so many. Yeah,
I think Mohammed had a question.
Yeah, there is a question.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Oh, how long has your book been? Thank you. I'm sorry, y'all. I haven't been tracking the chat very well. How long have I been working on the book Walk? It's been oh my gosh, so many years. There's been so many stages, because it's such a personal piece. It's a creative piece, and so it's gone through many renditions. It includes stories from 2010. So I would say since 2010, it's been this floating. I've locked it away many times, have come back to it and changed it. So the last 10 years, probably 10 to 12 years, I would say the last 4 years is when I really started getting organized and trying to seek a publisher to work with. And so, yeah, but many years. Thank you for that question.
All right, so many thanks.
Awesome.
We'll close it out here.
Awesome. Thank you, Mohammed. Thank you, everyone. Really good to be with you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.